How much does a Wi-Fi wireless site survey cost? Coming up next. So I've been doing wireless site survey since 1999, year 2000. If you look at some of my other videos, I mentioned that I did a lot of site surveys back in the pre-2.4 gigahertz days when it was 900 megahertz. And we were working off of the NORAD system. So I get this question a lot, is how much does a Wi-Fi survey cost and what's the cost of material to get started? So I made a PowerPoint slide that I just want to quickly go through. So my customers and then some of the groups that I'm mentoring, some of the IT consultants that are looking at getting into site surveys, so they can kind of get an overall glimpse of how much the tools cost. So I would say the most expensive part of the site survey is probably the software and the licensing cost. There's two major site survey softwares that are probably number one and number two on the market, which are Airmagnet or NetScout and Ekahau. And that license itself costs anywhere from $4,800 to $6,000 US, plus your yearly license for making sure that your software is up to date and so on every year. I see most companies use either or Ekahau or Airmagnet. I personally use Airmagnet just because I've been using Airmagnet for the last, I would say maybe like the last 8 years, and so I'm just so used to using Airmagnet, so I just don't find any reason for me to switch. Some people say Ekahau is the gold standard, but for what I collect and for what most site survey technicians or engineers need, they're pretty much looking for SNR values, RSSI, and some kind of spectrum analysis. So that provides the customer plenty of information to gather and to read within the reports. So Ekahau, I have a sample of Airmagnet, which I can show you just in a second. So here is a copy of Airmagnet Survey Professional Edition. This is running on my Mac via VM Fusion. And here is Airmagnet, similar to Ekahau, where what you're looking for is just a representation of signal to noise ratio and SNR values, configuring your radio client in your laptop on your USB card, and collecting the data from the AP. So this is going to provide you heat maps, the path that you walked, and each point that you click on, you can actually see, the signal strength from the first AP, which is minus 43 dBm, the X and Y axis information, and then just the path that it walked. Just because I was doing this sample in my home office, you could actually see that I positioned the AP here, but as you get further, the value or the colors of these cells are going to change from, right now we're sitting about minus 50 just because the access point, but in the real environment you'll see that these cell coverage signals are going to go lower and lower, and you'll see that in the path as you walk. So this is what Airmagnet Site Survey Pro looks like. You could do a ton of different things, like look at Airwise, you could look at the signal coverage, multi-AP signal coverage, just a ton of information that you can do. And last but not least, you can export and provide the report to your customer. So the second point I have over there is access points. So when you perform a site survey, we get a lot of requests for having a site survey in Aruba, HP, Cisco, Meraki, Aerohive. So, a lot of our customers are going to ask for these requests. And usually when we perform a site survey, you want to take out the radio or the access point that they're looking at implementing. Sometimes they might have a close relationship with Cisco, Meraki, and sometimes you're not getting the hardware. Sometimes you might not get that hardware deal, and a lot of what I've seen is the customer will contact me for a site survey, or they'll contact us for a site survey, and we'll ask them what kind of radio you're going to be using or what kind of access point. So this is the reason why we carry so many access points. We have an outdoor access point antenna here, which is a Meraki device. We've got the Cisco 3000 series AP. Some older Cisco 1230s, just for kind of looking at propagation in the warehouse, just to see how clean the air is. And we have Some bridge APs, Ubiquiti stuff, and some other Cisco devices. So the cost of those are roughly anywhere from $400 to $1,500, depending on outdoor and indoor, internal antenna, external antennas, and so on. So the next point, we covered that already, which is external antennas, external battery packs. I like to keep 2 external battery packs because when you're doing long site surveys, that'll take longer than 6 to 8 hours. The worst thing is running out of batteries when you're on site, either in your laptop or in your battery pack. So I always like to keep 2 with me, 2 laptops and 2 battery packs. So this is the battery pack that I use. It's a Sparco battery pack, and it just provides power over Ethernet to that access point. And if you're wondering what these chains are used for, we use a scissor lift to get up to the ceiling, hang this in the ceiling, and then attach is your standard Cisco Meraki access point bracket, or just actually this is a universal bracket where we attach one of our access point. Then we go around the warehouse or the office and just collect the signal readings. So the next point we have out here is AP on a stick. So this is typically used in office environments with probably about 9 to 10 foot ceilings, your standard office environment. And basically what this is, it has, you can't see this, but it has wheels on the floor, and this just carries another access point with that battery pack and going into whatever device that you're using for your access point. So that is roughly about $1,500 for this piece of equipment. And the next point here we have is a spectrum analyzer. Really depending on where you get your spectrum analyzer, EcoHouse has a built-in one with their software. We use MetaGeek's Channelizer, which I think they're pioneer for the Channelizer for the spectrum analysis, and I think just a lot of other companies white label or OEM and just integrate that into their survey software, and that's roughly about $1,000 US. Cameras are just used for gathering data, AP placements on your site survey, and you built that into your report. Your walking stick is just a necessity when you're doing measurements within a facility, large warehouses. That's not too much of a cost. Radio cards, $300 each. I've personally have about 4 to 5 radio cards, one for spectrum analysis, one for 2.4, and an Ornico, just so it can read a lot of my signal to noise ratio and data in my software. Some adapters, you'll notice that they don't read the SNR and the noise ratio values, and they might just read the RSSI. So you have to check that with your software and just make sure that the type of card that you have, my EDI card doesn't look at SNR values. So when you're doing a survey, it's just nice to collect RSSI values, signal to noise ratio, and just noise. And it's always great to have extra cards as a backup. And the next, I would say 3 or 4 points are just, a given. You have your liability insurance, which is anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500. Your scissor lift and fall protection license. I've been on sites where you'd have the health and safety board come in and they'd ask for your scissor lift license or your fall protection license or fall arrest license, WSIB, just making sure that you have your proper liability insurance. And the last point of this is, which is hard to put a cost on, is the years of training and experience that that individual has or that company has. Just because I've worked with a lot of companies, and because I specialize in warehouse management systems and manufacturing logistics and 3PL, that is my specialty. So there's a big difference when you're doing site surveys just for office environments. Laptops are stationary. The probably most challenging part that you're going to have is voice over IP applications that are not roaming. Typically office environments that are running VoIP, you just need better signal to noise ratio and better RSSI levels just so you can have, a minus 60 dBm. So with warehousing, a little more challenging because there's a lot of metal, a lot of multipathing, a lot of bounce. And typically your handhelds are fast roaming devices. They're on forklifts and trucks. So they're not stationary, and controllers like to change depending on your setting, maybe every X amount of seconds. So you might have an RF device, whether it's a Zebra or Intermec or Honeywell device, come into this area and then move over to the next from a forklift, and then it just changes your parameters, and a controller doesn't really know what to do. You know, controllers are only so smart, right? It just, you know, a lot of times I like to set my controller to manual instead of having an auto or off, but that just really depends on the environment that you're in and how everything propagates. So the total cost of all this, and which I roughly estimated is roughly about $15,000. So I just wanted to give the answers to some of the guys that I'm mentoring on this. So before you get an actual site survey and you get the implementation done, I wanted to list a few points that, as a customer, from the customer point of view, before hiring a company, a lot of things to consider. Here's one of my points: is it outsourced? Right? The reason being is because typically a site survey contractor, if they are working for a large organization that, like, they usually don't provide their in-house site survey expertise, they'll usually subcontract that out to another individual. And the problem with that is we ran into a situation where we subcontracted one of our site surveys out in, I think it was in Boise, Idaho, or another state. So the contractor did the site survey, right, which is fine. The report looked good, but we had a lot of questions. So because this individual wasn't an employee of that customer, what happened, we tried to get a hold of that customer, or that site survey technician, and it was impossible. We were calling and calling the subcontracting company that actually hired them, tried to get a hold of them, and it was impossible. So we had a lot of SKUs and missing parts in the survey, which we weren't aware of, or we didn't know the measurement or the type of antenna, the part number that they recommended. So it was a big mess, and we actually had to eat the cost of that, and that was a lesson learned. So you also want to make sure when you're working with either a subcontractor or you subcontract it out, you want to make sure that they're going to provide post-implementation support, or maybe just build it into the site survey cost and just have them, are they available for 1 hour after the site survey report. So typically when I get a call, customers are either looking for a passive site survey or an active site survey. If it's just a passive site survey where a customer is just looking for overall heat maps and signal to noise ratios, then that is probably the least cost, because the customer already has, or you already have, an implementation done. You have access points in the ceiling, but you might just need overall images, SNR values, and heat maps. And that's probably the lowest cost, just because it's just a visual representation of how your environment looks in terms of making sure that you don't have any dead spots, SNR value and RSSI values look great. And the other part of a passive site survey, which is hard to kind of quote or get an estimate on, is if they're doing a passive site survey, or if the customer wants a passive site survey, the first thing you should be asking the customer is it because you're having issues? Because a passive site survey where you're troubleshooting roaming issues or wireless connections dropping could take anywhere from 1 hour, 2 hours to days. I've been on site for one of our customers, Honda. I think it was 3 weeks till 3 in the morning. We couldn't do any activity live during the day because we already passed the go live date, but we had to fix a lot of the roaming issues in the warehouse because we were doing a lot of debugs walking through the aisles, but we kept getting a lot of signal drops or packet drops. So that was very challenging because the guys on the floor were live. We didn't want to interrupt them. We couldn't take anything down. So we actually had to do a lot of our work from 10 p.m. to 3 in the morning. So passive site surveys, depending on the type of debug session it is, could take, days, weeks. It just really depends. So the next point we're going to be discussing is the active site survey. And this is probably the question that most of you guys are coming on this video to get an answer for, is how much is that active site survey? So an active site survey in my eyes is, I've got a new warehouse, I got a new office, I need wireless. How much does it cost? And based on all those factors, it just really depends on how many floors, how large it is. I like to say it ranges between 1,500, I would say more 2,000 to 10,000. I typically quote, if it's 25,000 or less, you're probably looking on the low scale of 2,000. And if it's there's other factors to be considered. You know, is it an indoor survey? Is it an outdoor? Is it a combination of both? You know, I remember doing a site survey for a hotel operations, not a hotel operations itself, but it was their headquarters downtown in Toronto. And I underquoted it probably around 4,000, but they actually had 4 floors. And each floor was large. I would say it was about 8 to 10,000 in feet, but it had a lot of rooms that needed to be covered. So one access point couldn't actually cover a large office area. So if I actually took a look at the facility, did a quick walkthrough before providing that quote, I probably would have tripled that quote price. So, you know, the main thing is just looking at the schematics, asking a lot of questions before you provide that quote. And downtown areas I find are very challenging, because when you're in a downtown core area, glass is transparent, and you're going to see a lot of you're going to see a lot of access points in one core area running on 2.4. And the main question that I like to ask is a customer ready to go from 2.4 to 5, because 2.4 is just so congested? When it gets to the higher prices of 10,000, that's pretty much warehouses that are 200,000 square feet. Anything over 200,000 square feet, I'm going to provide them a higher value in terms of how much a site survey costs. One other thing, if you have a 200,000 square foot warehouse and they have an outdoor facility, then you'd be charging more for that outdoor facility. So this is one antenna that I use on a Cisco device. And this is actually a 2.4 12 dBi antenna, and great for outdoor applications, provides a lot of coverage in an outdoor yard. So my next point that I want to cover is a contractor or company using the latest software or the latest firmware version or the latest version in Ekahau or Airmagnet? The other week I actually lost a deal in the US because my partner didn't have the latest version of Airmagnet, and we actually needed that, you know, X version. So, and I run into this quite often, is I'll ask another company for the files, but they're running version 7 when we're, you know, 5 years ahead of that. So you just really want to make sure that you have, or that the company has the latest version of Airmagnet or Ekahau, because then you can import a lot of those different profiles for antennas and different manufacturers' access points. So that's very, very important. You know, I've been asked this question probably about 2 or 3 times. And the last point I want to go over, which I think is a must with every site survey, is does the company that is providing the site survey, does it include a spectrum analysis? Because a wireless site survey using Ekahau or Airmagnet, well, it depends if you have that plugin for the spectrum analysis. You know, from a heat map perspective and a site survey, usually you're just collecting RSSI and SNR values. But without a spectrum analysis and knowing how clean the air is, you know, a site survey is useless. The first thing I like to do is turn on my laptop, do a spectrum analysis, just see if there's any potential sources of interference. Because if you have a lot of interference, then 2.4 or 5 gig won't work, period. Until you find those sources of interference and you resolve those issues, then 2.4 or 5 gig or 802.11 Wi-Fi will work in your environment. So this is a copy of Channelizer Pro. This is from MetaGeek. I always run this prior to doing any kind of site survey, just to get a glimpse to see how clean the air is. So you want to make sure that you do this, because here you can actually see some potential sources of interference depending on the signature displays. So if there's interference on too many channels, then you're going to see right away that 2.4 might not be able to be used in that particular environment. Here on the Cisco Clean Air on the 5 gigs, you can see that we have a lot more channels to deal with, which are available. So if you look at this spectrum analysis, everything looks a lot cleaner. As I move through the waterfall, it's very clean and quiet compared to 2.4. If we go over to 2.4, you'll actually see that you're really only working with 3 non-overlapping channels, which are 1, 6, and 11. And with 5 gig, it's completely noise-free, I would say. You know, maybe a little bit of regular data coming through channel 40, channel 136, 165. And you can look at everything else in between. It's just such a clean environment. So thank you for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, please ask them below. Don't forget to subscribe to the bell notification and like the video. Thanks.